The morning after Amelia's first night at Manderley was wrapped in a silence so delicate that even the walls seemed to breathe carefully, as if the house itself feared to wake something ancient. Pale light crept through the tall windows, touching the curtains like hesitant fingers, revealing dust motes that drifted like lost souls. The ocean murmured faintly in the distance, a low, endless voice that spoke in a language she didn't yet understand. Amelia walked the long corridors as though trespassing through memory. Every step echoed softly, swallowed by velvet carpets and the scent of old wood. The portraits that lined the hall watched her with painted eyes, generations of proud, unsmiling faces who seemed to ask the same silent question, "Who are you to walk among us?" Yet when she entered the breakfast room, everything changed. Maxim sat by the window, his face framed by soft light, the morning sun painting a gentler version of him. The lines of worry and weariness she'd seen the day before were smoothed away. He looked almost boyish again, not the haunted man who lived among shadows, but someone who might once have believed in happiness. When he smiled, something in her chest unknotted. The coldness of Manderley dissolved for a moment. It was strange how one expression from him could warm an entire room. They spoke lightly, of the gardens, the coastline, the curious habits of the seagulls that circled the cliffs. But beneath their small talk, there was something heavier, a current that neither dared to name. Every word they exchanged felt like a note in a song they didn't know they were composing. When she laughed, his eyes lingered on her, not out of politeness, but with the intensity of a man memorizing the sound of something he thought he'd lost forever. After breakfast, they walked through the misty gardens. The hedges gleamed with dew, and the air was rich with the scent of earth and roses. The house stood behind them like a silent witness, its windows reflecting the gray sky. Maxim spoke of history, of ancestors who had lived and died within Manderley's walls, each leaving behind fragments of themselves. He said the house never forgot anyone. Amelia wondered quietly if it ever forgave. The wind rose, playful yet cold, tangling her hair into wild threads of gold and brown. Without thinking, Maxim reached to tuck a loose strand behind her ear. His touch was light, too careful, almost trembling, but it was enough to stop her breath. For a moment, neither moved. There was only the sound of the wind and the restless sea beyond the cliffs. Then he said, in a voice low and strange, "Some places are not just homes, Amelia. They're destinies." She met his gaze and felt a shiver that wasn't from the cold. She didn't know whether he meant Manderley or her. That night, she stood by her window, looking down at the gardens below. The moonlight lay like frost across the lawn, and somewhere, far off, the sea whispered secrets against the shore. In that silence, she felt the weight of something forming, something beautiful and dangerous, and entirely beyond her control. Days passed in a rhythm that felt like a dream's repetition. The staff began to accept her presence, polite, distant, but no longer openly suspicious. Only Mrs. Danvers remained unchanged. Her movements were smooth as silk, her expression a mask that never cracked. Yet Amelia could feel her gaze wherever she went, cold as a hand at the back of her neck. When Maxim was away, she wandered alone through the house, tracing the faded tapestries, the forgotten rooms sealed behind heavy doors. Each chamber seemed to hum faintly with memory. Sometimes, she thought she heard laughter down a corridor where no one stood, or smelled perfume in a room untouched for years. She told herself it was imagination, the tricks of an old house and a lonely mind. But late one afternoon, while walking near the cliffs, she found a narrow path she had not seen before. It wound down toward the sea, hidden by ivy and rock. The wind grew stronger the closer she came, as though urging her back. Still, she followed it, until she saw the boathouse. It stood half-hidden by wild grass, its paint peeling, the air around it thick with salt and decay. She pushed the door open, and it groaned as if in pain. Inside, dust hung like mist. Ropes, oars, and lanterns lay abandoned, frozen in time. Cobwebs veiled the beams like forgotten lace. Amelia ran her hand along the old wooden table. There were faint marks carved into it, letters, maybe initials, but time had worn them too faint to read. A strange sadness welled inside her, as though she were mourning someone she'd never met. The wind shifted. A faint chill brushed her shoulder. She turned sharply, heart leaping, but no one was there. Only the door, creaking softly in rhythm with the tide. That night, she dreamed again, of the sea, red as spilled wine, rippling under a silver moon. In the dream, a woman's laughter echoed across the water, soft and cruel. When Amelia woke, her pillow was damp with sweat, and her heart pounded as if she had been running. At breakfast the next morning, Maxim noticed the shadows under her eyes. He studied her for a long time before speaking. "You look as if the sea followed you home," he said. She smiled faintly, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "Perhaps it did." He looked at her for a moment longer, as though deciding something. "Then I must protect you from it." The words were gentle, but there was an edge of fear beneath them, a fear she couldn't name. That afternoon, the sky darkened early. Rain gathered like whispers against the glass. Amelia stood at the window, watching the waves crash against the cliffs. Somewhere out there, she thought, the sea was keeping secrets, and one of them, somehow, belonged to her. She turned from the window and caught her reflection in the mirror, pale, uncertain, a stranger in a borrowed world. Behind her reflection, the room seemed to shift, as if the walls themselves breathed differently. She blinked, and for a fraction of a second, she thought she saw another woman standing where she was, the shape of her body familiar, her face hidden by shadow. When she looked again, the room was empty. But something had changed. The silence of Manderley was no longer gentle. The days that followed seemed to lose their edges, melting one into another like ink in water. She began to fill her days with small rituals. In the mornings, she wrote letters she never sent, to her late mother, to the sea, sometimes even to herself. At noon, she wandered through the rose gardens, tracing the iron gates overgrown with vines. In the evenings, she played the piano in the drawing room, soft melodies that dissolved into silence before anyone could hear them. Sometimes, Maxim would appear unexpectedly, in doorways, on the terrace, or near the stables, always watching her for a moment before speaking. His presence steadied her, and yet, it confused her too. There were days he was warm, almost tender, speaking with quiet laughter that made her heart ache. And then there were days when he withdrew completely, leaving her stranded in the echo of his absence. Once, she found him in the library at dusk, sitting before the fire, his face unreadable. He was staring into the flames as though they were mirrors. When she softly spoke his name, he turned, and the look in his eyes silenced her. It wasn't anger or sadness, but something deeper, like a wound that had never healed. That night, she dreamed of a woman standing at the edge of the sea, tall, graceful, her dark hair loose in the wind. The woman turned to look at her, and though Amelia could not see her face, she knew, somehow, that this was the one Manderley could not forget. When she woke, her heart was heavy with a longing that wasn't her own. On a quiet afternoon, the mist rolled in thick and white, wrapping the grounds in secrecy. Amelia wandered outside, the world around her fading into whispers. Her footsteps crunched softly over gravel, and soon, she reached the cliffs where the sea stretched endless and gray. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw, the way the waves broke against the rocks, the faint outline of gulls caught between fog and horizon. But the lines refused to stay still. The ocean looked alive on paper, restless, shifting, as though something beneath the surface wanted to rise. Her pencil stopped when she felt the change in the air, that same faint chill, the same sense of being watched. She turned sharply. Behind her stood Mrs. Danvers. Her black dress blended into the mist, her face, pale and carved of quiet disdain. "I see you found her favorite spot," Mrs. Danvers said softly. "She loved it here." Amelia's throat tightened. "Who did?" Mrs. Danvers' lips curved slightly. "You know who." The housekeeper's gaze drifted toward the sea, her eyes gleaming with something between sorrow and pride. "She would come here for hours. No matter the weather." Said the sea understood her better than people did. Perhaps that's why she never feared it. A shiver ran through Amelia. "But she drowned, didn't she?" Mrs. Danvers' voice was almost affectionate. "The sea doesn't drown its own." The mist thickened around them, blurring the line between land and sky. When Amelia looked up again, Mrs. Danvers had already turned away, her figure swallowed by fog, leaving behind only the echo of her perfume, faint and old, like dried roses. That evening, Maxim invited her for dinner. The invitation came through a servant, written in his careful hand. The note was brief, but the handwriting trembled slightly, a hesitation she could feel in the ink. She dressed simply, a soft gray gown with lace sleeves, modest but elegant, her hair pinned back loosely with a silver clasp. There was a quiet hope fluttering inside her, though she tried not to name it. The dining room was glowing with candlelight. The long table gleamed like glass, the air warm with the scent of roasted herbs and wine. But it was not grandeur that struck her, it was the way Maxim looked when she entered. For the first time, his expression softened entirely. "You look," he paused, searching for the right word, "as though you belong here." The sentence lingered between them, heavy with more meaning than it seemed. They dined slowly, their conversation flowing easily at first, stories of books, of travel, of dreams they never chased. But beneath the warmth, Amelia felt an invisible tension, like a thread pulling tighter with each word. After dinner, he led her to the library, where the fire burned low and the air was rich with the scent of paper and rain. Outside, thunder muttered faintly across the sea. Inside, time seemed to stop. He poured her wine but didn't drink his own. His hands trembled as he set the bottle down. The flicker of the fire danced across his face, showing her a man caught between courage and confession. "Some hearts," he said quietly, "wait too long to speak." She didn't reply. She couldn't. The room seemed to tilt around her. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've brought life back into this place. Into me. I thought Manderley would remain a tomb forever, until you." The words broke something open in her, not joy, but a deep, aching tenderness. She wanted to believe him, to reach for the light he offered. Yet in the back of her mind, a single thought whispered, "He speaks as though he's talking to a ghost." He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against her hand. His touch was warm, but his eyes were full of stormlight. "I don't deserve peace," he murmured. "But you make me wish for it again." For a long moment, the only sound was the fire, crackling softly, like the heartbeat of the house itself. Amelia felt her pulse mirror it. She had never been so close to him, never seen him this unguarded. The weight of his sorrow drew her in like gravity. Outside, rain began to fall. Slow, heavy drops against the glass. He stood before her now, searching her face as though reading something written in her silence. Then, in a voice that trembled at the edges, he said, "Marry me." The words hung in the air like thunder before it breaks. She couldn't breathe. Time froze, even the rain seemed to pause mid-fall. His expression wasn't pride or certainty, it was desperation. The plea of a man who feared what loneliness might do to him if left too long in the dark. Amelia wanted to answer. But all she could feel was the echo of that invisible presence between them, the woman who had stood here before her, the one whose shadow lingered in every corner of the house. Still, she saw something in Maxim's eyes, not the man she feared, but the one who could still love. And for a heartbeat, that was enough. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He reached for her again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let me start over, Amelia. Let us both start over." And in that trembling silence, she nodded. His breath left him in a quiet exhale, a fragile sound that broke the tension of the storm. He pulled her close, and for the first time, she felt his heart racing against hers, unsteady, human. They stood in that fragile moment, two souls pretending they had rewritten the past. The night after the proposal felt unreal, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Amelia walked through the silent halls, her fingertips brushing the wallpaper as if to remind herself this was real. She had said yes. Those 3 letters had changed everything. She could still feel the tremor of his voice when he'd asked, still see the way his eyes had searched hers, not for love, but for permission to live again. She wanted to believe in the promise of it, in beginnings, in redemption. Yet even as she climbed the grand staircase that night, her reflection in the windows looked like a stranger. A girl too easily caught between love and a ghost. She paused outside the library, where the proposal had happened only hours ago. The room was empty now, yet the air still hummed with the memory of it, the rhythm of his heartbeat against hers, the quiet ache in his smile, the fire that burned like confession. A whisper of laughter, soft, feminine, brushed the edge of her hearing. She froze. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable, carried by the wind through the corridor. When she turned, no one was there. Morning brought pale light and the illusion of peace. The sea lay calm, the air cool and heavy with salt. Maxim was gone before dawn. The servants said he'd gone to the village to make arrangements. Arrangements? The word itself felt sharp, too practical for something as fragile as love. Amelia wandered to the rose garden, hoping to clear the unease that clung to her like mist. Dew hung from every petal, glimmering like tiny mirrors. She thought of the stories Maxim told her, how generations of his family had lived and died here. How each stone of Manderley carried the weight of their memories. Now she was about to become one of them. A movement caught her eye. Mrs. Danvers stood at the far end of the path, her black dress cutting through the white fog like a blade. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Amelia forced a smile, a fragile attempt at civility, but the older woman's face remained still, unreadable. When she finally turned away, Amelia felt the stare follow her, burning like a shadow she couldn't shake. That afternoon, the sea began to change. Winds rose, bending the trees, and clouds gathered low over the cliffs. The servants hurried to shut the windows, muttering about a storm coming from the north. Amelia stood by her window, watching the waves grow restless. The horizon blurred until sea and sky became one vast, trembling gray. Somewhere below, the waves crashed against the rocks with a rhythm that sounded almost human, like breathing. When Maxim returned that evening, his face carried traces of exhaustion and something else, a quiet fear he tried to hide. His clothes were damp from rain, his hair slightly disheveled, but his voice was calm when he spoke. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. The clinking of silverware sounded too sharp, the clock too loud. Between them lay an invisible wall, not built by words, but by the ghosts of the unsaid. He reached across the table once, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting reassurance. But in his eyes, she saw the same darkness she had felt in the corridors, a shadow older than either of them. When the thunder rolled across the sky, he looked toward the window, his jaw tightening. She thought she saw guilt there, brief but unmistakable. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the chimneys, the house creaked as if shifting in its sleep. She rose, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped into the hall. The candle in her hand flickered with every step. The silence of Manderley was not empty, it was full of murmurs, sighs, and invisible footsteps. The portraits on the wall seemed to follow her as she moved, their painted eyes alive with curiosity. As she reached the landing, something caught her attention, faint light spilling from under the door at the end of the corridor. The west wing. The one room she had never entered. The door was slightly open. The air inside smelled faintly of salt and roses, the same scent that haunted every dream she had since arriving. She pushed it gently, the hinges sighing in protest. Inside, the room was perfectly preserved. A vanity stood before the window, dust dancing in the candlelight. Perfume bottles lined the table, their glass still gleaming. A silk shawl hung over a chair as though someone had just left it there. And on the dresser, a silver hairbrush, identical to the one in Amelia's room, engraved with a single letter, R. Her breath caught. The air grew heavy, almost unbreathable. As she reached toward it, her reflection in the mirror shifted. For a heartbeat, she saw another woman, dark-haired, elegant, smiling faintly, standing behind her. Then the candle flickered, and the vision was gone. Her pulse raced. The mirror now showed only herself, pale, frightened, alive. She stepped back, nearly dropping the candle. Behind her, a voice, soft, cold, whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Amelia spun around. The doorway was empty, but the air still trembled. Mrs. Danvers appeared moments later, her expression calm but her eyes glinting. "You mustn't wander this part of the house," she said, her tone deceptively gentle. "It's sacred." The word chilled her. Sacred, but to whom? Amelia didn't answer. She only nodded, retreating, the echo of that single letter, R, searing itself into her mind. The storm hit at midnight. Rain lashed against the windows, waves crashing furiously against the cliffs. Manderley trembled under the wind's fury, its old walls groaning as though remembering every storm before. Amelia sat by the fire, unable to calm the tremor in her chest. Somewhere above, doors slammed, curtains flapped, and the house seemed alive, restless, wild. Maxim entered, soaked from the rain, his coat clinging to him like shadow. His eyes found hers instantly, dark with something that wasn't fear, but recognition. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," he said softly, and though his voice was steady, his hands weren't. She wanted to ask him what haunted him, what names still lingered on his lips when he thought she couldn't hear. But before she could speak, lightning split the sky, flooding the room in silver light. And in that flash, she saw it again, the silver hairbrush, lying now on the mantel where it hadn't been before. Her heart froze. Maxim's gaze followed hers. For a moment, the world went silent. His expression drained of color. He moved toward it slowly, like a man approaching a grave. Rain dripped from his sleeves onto the floor as he picked it up. His thumb brushed the engraved letter, trembling slightly. Amelia stepped closer, whispering, "It was in the West Wing." He didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes, when they finally met hers, were the eyes of a man standing on the edge of confession and collapse. Outside, the wind howled louder. Somewhere within the walls, something fell, a distant crash echoing through the corridors. The fire hissed, the lights flickered, and between thunderclaps she heard it again, that laughter. Faint, feminine, familiar. It came from the West Wing. Maxim froze. His grip tightened on the silver brush until his knuckles went white. And Amelia realized, with a sudden, chilling certainty, he wasn't just haunted by her. He was terrified of her. The storm outside seemed to answer her thoughts, roaring through the windows like the sea itself was warning them both. Manderley shuddered. Candles blew out one by one. The world stood still after she said yes. For a heartbeat, even the sea seemed to hold its breath. The fire crackled softly behind them, throwing gold across Maxim's face. A face caught between disbelief and relief, between love and something far darker. Amelia's hands trembled in his. She could feel the pulse of his heart, wild, uneven, desperate, like a man clutching at salvation in a storm. For a moment, it was beautiful. For a moment, it was everything she had ever wanted to believe in. But in the silence that followed, she thought she heard something faint, like a sigh carried by the walls themselves. A whisper of silk. A woman's laugh. Gone in an instant. Her smile faltered. Maxim noticed, his thumb brushing her cheek. "What is it?" he asked softly. She hesitated. The wind, perhaps." But it wasn't the wind. She knew it wasn't. Later that night, when she returned to her room, the house had gone utterly still. The air was thick with that old, familiar scent, roses and rain. The curtains whispered faintly in the breeze, though the windows were closed. Her reflection in the mirror seemed almost like someone else, her eyes brighter, her face pale, her lips touched by something she couldn't name. She reached to brush her hair, and the silver comb caught the firelight. For a moment, she saw another hand in the mirror, graceful, slender, guiding hers. She froze. And then it was gone. The brush fell from her hand and clattered against the vanity. Amelia's breath trembled as she looked around the room. "Who's there?" she whispered. Only silence. But it wasn't an empty silence, it listened back. Somewhere in the corridor, she thought she heard footsteps, soft, measured, distant. Too distant to be real. She forced herself into bed, pulling the blanket to her chin, but her eyes wouldn't close. The echo of the footsteps lingered in her head long after they had faded. Morning came with the faintest gold light crawling over the sea. The storm had passed, leaving behind a hush, the kind of silence that feels like the aftermath of a confession. She found Maxim already awake, standing near the window of the breakfast room, gazing at the horizon. He looked older that morning, not tired, but hollowed out, as if something had been taken from him in the night. You didn't sleep, she said quietly. He turned, startled. No. I suppose I didn't. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him, eyes that had seen too much, eyes that never quite looked away from the past. They sat together in silence. The servants moved about quietly, almost reverently. Even Mrs. Danvers lingered at the doorway longer than usual, her gaze cold, unreadable. When Amelia met her eyes, something sharp flickered there, not hatred, but pity. A strange, knowing pity that sent a chill down Amelia's spine. Later, Maxim suggested a walk along the cliffs. The air was clean after the storm, the world washed raw. Seagulls cried over the waves, and the wind carried the smell of salt and heather. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then he said, almost absently, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." Her breath caught. "About what?" "About Manderley," he said after a pause. "And about what came before." She waited, but he didn't continue. His face had that same haunted stillness she'd seen when the waves first broke the night before. A man standing on the edge of something too deep to name. Finally, she said, "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to." He smiled faintly. "That's the trouble, Amelia. I'll never be ready. But I can't ask you to build a life with me while half of mine still belongs to the dead." Her heart twisted at his words. To the dead. He took her hand. "Manderley keeps memories. It holds them too tightly. Sometimes I wonder if it ever lets go." A sudden gust of wind tore through the cliffs, and the sea below roared as if in answer. Amelia turned toward the water, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw something. A shape in the foam, pale, almost human. A trick of the light, perhaps. But it lingered long enough to make her step back. Maxim pulled her close. "Careful," he said. His voice was soft but firm, almost protective, almost pleading. "I'm fine," she whispered. But inside, she wasn't sure she was. That evening, Manderley felt alive again, too alive. The house creaked, the air heavy with the scent of sea and roses. The firelight flickered strangely, casting moving shadows along the walls. As Amelia passed the great staircase, she heard faint music coming from somewhere upstairs. A piano, playing low and slow, the notes echoing through the halls. Her heart began to race. She followed the sound, her bare feet quiet on the carpet, until she reached the door of the west wing, the one that was always locked. But tonight, it was open. The music stopped. A draft of cold air brushed her cheek. Inside, moonlight spilled across the floor, touching the corner of a large, dust-covered piano. And on the piano, a single rose. Fresh. Crimson. Amelia's throat tightened. She stepped closer, reaching toward it, when a voice behind her whispered, low, almost gentle, "She used to play that song." Amelia turned sharply. Mrs. Danvers stood in the doorway, her face a mask of something between sorrow and satisfaction. "Who did?" Amelia asked. Mrs. Danvers' eyes drifted to the piano. "You know who." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air in the room seemed to throb with memory. "Why are you showing me this?" Amelia whispered. Mrs. Danvers smiled faintly. "Because he won't. Because you should know what you're trying to replace." Her words sliced through the silence. Amelia felt her pulse quicken. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "Oh, but you are," Mrs. Danvers said softly. "You just don't know it yet." She turned and walked away, leaving Amelia alone in the cold moonlight. Amelia stood there for a long time, staring at the rose, the piano, the ghost of something beautiful and broken. Then she whispered to the empty room, "Who were you?" The wind answered through the open window, a sound like laughter, soft and distant, fading into the sea. That night, when she returned to her room, Maxim was waiting for her. His eyes were shadowed, his hands clasped behind his back. "You went to the West Wing," he said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes," she said quietly. "I heard music." His face hardened. "There is no music in that room." "Then what did I hear?" He didn't answer. For a long moment, he only looked at her, really looked, as though seeing her for the first time, realizing how fragile she was beneath her courage. Finally, he said, "Some doors in Manderley should never be opened." She stepped closer. If I am to live here, if I am to be your wife, then I can't live among secrets. His jaw tightened. Secrets are what hold this place together, Amelia. Without them, everything falls apart. She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. Then maybe it deserves to. He turned away, his voice breaking. You don't understand. Then make me, she whispered. For a moment he almost did. His lips parted, his breath unsteady, the truth trembling at the edge of confession, but then something stopped him. Fear, guilt, or maybe both. He crossed to the door instead. Not tonight, he said quietly. Please. And then he was gone. And in the reflection of the mirror, for just a heartbeat, she saw a woman standing behind her. Smiling. In the library, the fire had gone out. Only embers glowed faintly, the color of dying stars. Maxim's chair was empty, but his glass of wine still sat half full beside the book he hadn't finished. The page was turned down, not as a reader marks a story, but as someone marking a memory they can't bear to read again. Amelia touched the spine, her fingers lingering over the dust. She felt the weight of everything he hadn't said pressing between the lines. Her reflection in the glass was pale, blurred by rain. For a heartbeat, another face seemed to appear beside hers, softer, older, cruelly beautiful. The outline of a smile flickered, then vanished. Her heart raced. She turned away. When she finally found Maxim, he was standing in the corridor outside the West Wing, his shirt undone at the collar, his hair damp from the storm wind that had slipped in through the windows. He looked like a man trapped between worlds, one living, one buried beneath the sea. He didn't speak. He only looked at her, his eyes hollow, distant. Amelia stepped toward him. Her voice was soft, afraid to break the moment. You can't keep running from the past. He didn't answer. The silence stretched until she thought he might never speak again. Then finally his voice came, low, trembling, raw. The past doesn't stay buried at Manderley. Another roll of thunder cracked overhead. A door slamming. Twice. And then the faint sound of footsteps, measured, graceful, unhurried. Amelia turned toward the sound. There's someone here. Maxim didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the darkness down the hall, as if he'd seen this before, as if he knew exactly who it was. Lightning flared through the window, filling the hall with ghostly white light. For an instant, Amelia saw her, a woman in a flowing white gown, standing at the end of the corridor. Her hair dark as ink, her eyes catching the light like mirrors. And then the thunder came, and she was gone. Amelia stumbled back, her candle falling to the floor. When she looked up, Maxim was still staring into the dark, tears bright in his eyes. She shouldn't be here, he whispered. But whether he meant the ghost, or Amelia, she couldn't tell. The storm broke before midnight. Amelia couldn't sleep. She wandered again, this time drawn not by fear, but by a strange pull, as though the house itself were calling her name. Her steps led her, inevitably, toward the cliffs. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the storm. The wind tore at her hair, her dress clinging to her skin, but she didn't stop. Something in the dark was waiting, something she needed to understand. Amelia's breath caught. Someone was there. She took the narrow path down the cliffside, the mud slick beneath her shoes, the rain slicing through the night. Her heart pounded in her ears louder than the thunder. When she reached the boathouse, the door hung crooked, slamming softly with every gust. She stepped inside. The air was heavy with salt and decay. The lantern, if it had ever been real, was gone. Only the reflection of lightning flashed across the wet floorboards. And then she saw it. The silver hairbrush. It lay on the table, gleaming faintly under the moonlight. The same engraved art she'd seen before. The same scent of roses filling the air, stronger now, suffocating. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, but before she could touch it, a voice spoke from behind her. She left it there the night she died. Amelia froze. Maxim stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, his face pale as the sea foam outside. His eyes weren't angry, they were broken, hollow, stripped bare. The wind howled through the cracks, carrying the taste of salt and sorrow. He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. I thought if I destroyed everything she touched, she would finally let me go. But she never did. Amelia stared at him, her heart twisting. Tell me what happened. Lightning illuminated the boathouse again. For a second, it looked as though the sea itself had risen to the door. Maxim's hands shook. She was everything I wasn't. Brilliant, wild, cruel. She could make me love her and hate her in the same breath. His gaze drifted past her, to the brush, to the waves. She used to come here at night. To meet someone. To daunt me. To remind me she could never belong to anyone, not even to me. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. What happened, Maxim? He swallowed hard, the words barely finding their way out. There was a storm, just like this. She went out on the boat that night. I begged her not to. She laughed. Said she'd rather die at sea than live another day in this prison of stone. Thunder cracked so loud it shook the walls. He looked up, his face twisted in agony. I thought the sea took her. But sometimes I think she took the sea. The candle blew out. For a moment, darkness swallowed everything. Amelia's hand found his in the dark. His skin was ice. She wanted to speak, to comfort him, but the air changed. The smell of roses sharpened, filling her lungs, making her dizzy. Then, from the corner of the room, a soft sound. Footsteps. Slow. Wet. Coming closer. Amelia turned, her heart hammering. Lightning burst through the windows, and for a single, blinding instant, she saw her. The woman from the hall. The same dark hair. The same knowing smile. Water dripping from her gown, her skin pale and cold as death. She stood between them, her reflection shimmering in the wet floorboards like a shadow that refused to fade. Amelia couldn't move. Her body went rigid with terror and awe. Maxim's breath broke beside her, a sound of disbelief and guilt colliding. Then, just as suddenly, she was gone. Only the sound of the waves remained. They stood there for what felt like eternity. Neither spoke. Neither dared to breathe too deeply. Finally, Maxim turned to her, his voice hoarse. You see now why I begged you not to come here. Amelia shook her head. Tears mixed with the rain on her face. I see why you're haunted. But ghosts only stay where they're wanted. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, not in passion, but in surrender. Then tell me how to stop wanting her shadow. Amelia looked into his eyes filled with love, regret, and something darker still. You can't, she whispered. But maybe you can love me enough to let her rest. Their lips met, soft and trembling, under the howl of the storm. It wasn't the kiss of new love. It was the kiss of two broken souls trying to rebuild something from the ruins. But as their lips touched, a wave crashed so violently against the rocks that the entire boathouse shuddered. And from the sea below, a faint, unmistakable sound. Laughter. So feminine. Echoing. Amelia's eyes flew open. She pulled back, her heart thundering. The wind screamed through the door. Out there, beyond the cliffs, something glimmered beneath the surface. Silver, smooth, shaped like the bow of a boat. The same boat that had sunk a year ago. Amelia's breath caught. Maxim, he turned, following her gaze, and the color drained from his face. The wreck had risen. A trick of the storm, maybe. Or maybe not. Because as lightning split the sky, Amelia swore she saw someone standing on its deck, a woman in white, her hair blowing wild, her face turned toward the cliffs. The sea swallowed the vision a heartbeat later. But the laughter remained. So beautiful, cruel. And as the thunder rolled away, Maxim whispered into the wind, She's come home.